Welcome to Art Zone. Art Zone is a profile of art and artists in the Rockford area.
Hi, I'm Doc Slavkowski, and this is the Art Zone. We're coming to you from J.R. Kortman Center for Design, downtown in the heart of Rockford's Cultural District. In this Art Zone, we'll talk with artist Charles Gniech and see his exhibition at the Kortman Gallery entitled Monuments. This most recent body of work depicts conceptual monuments which Gniech says commemorate a moment, symbolize a transition, or reestablish an event. But first, Charlene Berg is well known in the Rockford arts community as a master framer and partner in Gallery 10. Her personal commitment to the arts becomes evident when you see her fascinating and well-placed art collection. We'll now take you to her downtown River East recently renovated loft apartment for this Art Zone's collections profile. This is our collector's profile for the Art Zone, and we're at a loft apartment in River East downtown, and this is the residence of Dewey Reisenhoover and Charlene Berg, who are married and happily married, living here in this apartment. Tell us about the whole thing, because this is an historic building in an historic district, and tell us a little bit about the house.
Well, Dewey and I were married 5 years ago, and in fact, when we came home from our honeymoon, we were across the street having a cup of coffee and saw that this particular building was for sale. So we took the number down of the realtor, gave them a call, and saw the building the following day, the downstairs level, and then we came upstairs and looked at the apartment, which was a boarding house at the time, although it was a single-family dwelling. And we liked what we saw, and so we made an offer. And Jim Provenzano, who had the upholstery shop here, his dad owned it for about 40 years, he countered on the offer, and we had a final deal on Thursday. So we purchased the building and closed on it on April 1st, which was April Fool's Day, and brought our sledgehammers in and started demolishing walls downstairs. And now, 3 years later, we've completely restored the building from the dirt floor in the basement to the roof. And so it now has my frame shop on the main level and Gallery 10. And we live here upstairs. And then a friend of ours who is a woodworker has his shop in the basement. So it's an art commune kind of thing.
The exterior people would be familiar with, just your point of reference was Gallery 10, and it is you just redid the exterior of the building.
Yes,
right?
that was the final phase of the renovation this summer. We had the brick all tuck pointed and painted the entire building, and then we remodeled the whole facade to bring it back to a period. The building's 101 years old, and so now it looks a little bit more like it used to 100 years ago.
What's interesting is that a lot of people do get a chance to see the exterior of these buildings downtown, but they don't realize that usually with an interesting facade, or just like the area that we're sitting in here, also makes for interesting interior rooms. None of the rooms here are just like boxes. They all have interesting nooks and crannies in it, and the way you've created the atmosphere, it's perfect for showing art.
I think each little area is its own little room, you know, so there isn't really, I don't think, you know, some people like to have a focal point when they go into a room. It's like this is the sofa-sized painting. But I like little vignettes, I think, you know, that are just really, wherever you are in a room, that's where you...
Are we getting all this?
Oh, you're kidding. I didn't know that's great. Well, interestingly enough, I do not have an art background, and neither does my family. We really didn't have art in our home, some family pictures on the wall, perhaps. And I didn't take art in school, except maybe the mandatory courses. So, frankly, I don't know where the interest came from, or the desire. When I first moved to Rockford, I was interested in something to do, and I think I went to Greenwich Village, was my very first exposure to real art. And bought my first piece of art, and that's been 20 years ago.
What piece was that?
A John Lebowski. Yes. And I don't know. I really don't know why, what the attraction is, but I have a passion for it. And I have been collecting for about 20 years, mostly from art shows, outdoor art shows, but I've gone to galleries and have purchased a lot of my work since from Gallery 10. And it's a very eclectic collection, and I just purchase whatever moves me.
Let's talk about some of the specific pieces here now. Your latest acquisition here. Explain a little bit about that.
I was at an art opening in Harvard on Sunday. Mary Alice Bernardin is an artist there, and she used to be an architect, interestingly enough. And she has developed her own style. So that's my most recent acquisition, and I just hung it before you came tonight. It had to get on the wall.
And name some of the other local artists that you have.
Local artist, Jimmy Julien. In fact, he says that I have his biggest collection. I'm a great fan of his. And Maggie Tienemann, she's another local artist I have. Catherine Lundstrom, Sandy Frick, I have pieces of hers. And Jeff Jacobs, he's a ceramicist, work that I have. Susan Scully, she's recently moved to Chicago, but originally from Rockford. So those are a few that I have in my collection.
You have, I don't want to say that you've themed the work out, but there are interrelationships in the way you have hung the art, which in a way is an art in itself, I think. And that's why I think everything looks so fantastic in here, is because of the relationships that the art has with each other, each of the pieces have with each other. And what's even interesting is, like, for instance, you have the black and white area down in the hallway, which is kind of like a gallery entrance. What you called a shotgun hallway, now they refer to as a gallery entranceway. And then you also have art in the bathroom. Tell us about that.
Art can go anywhere, and I don't think any of the artists would be offended or humiliated if I said their art was in my bathroom. The art in one of my bathrooms is my nude collection. It just seemed kind of appropriate that it would go there. And as I've collected over the years, I've lived in different homes and apartments, so each piece that I've collected, I made a space for it in whatever home I was in. But in this home, the whole renovation was completed, and then I had my entire collection that I was able to group, as you've said. So it was a real kind of a challenge for me to put each piece in a place and move it around a little bit before I actually hung it on the wall.
One of the most fascinating facets to this loft apartment, though, is the kitchen, because we are right in the middle of the city, but when you get into the kitchen, you have this feeling that you're right out in the middle of the country. I mean, you always hear this expression, people who live in the country and they want all the conveniences of the city, where here you are living in the city and you have a lot of the conveniences of the country, including even a hammock out on your back balcony there.
Our back porch is our backyard. We painted the floor green so it would be grass. But the kitchen is kind of a step back in time. My husband Dewey really loves antiques, and I've learned to develop a like for them as well, and I really love contemporary art. So jokingly, when we bought this great big wonderful loft apartment, and it's quite long, we kind of drew a line down the middle, and he said I could have this half and he could have the other half, and we're not supposed to cross over. But we do have contemporary art in his portion of the house too. But the kitchen, he wanted it to be a very period kitchen with his antiques, and it has an antique Roper stove and an old GE refrigerating machine with the condenser on the top that's cooled with ammonia, and a copper sink that looks sort of like a dry sink. But I'm a very modern lady, and I like modern conveniences, so we do have a garbage disposal and a microwave and all of those kinds of things, but they're discreetly hidden in the kitchen, so it really does look like a step back in time when you walk through there.
What would you say to somebody who's just interested in starting a collection of art?
If something moves you, buy it.
This is the Art Zone. This is the Art Zone.
One of the things I really like about my collection is that I know and or have met and have talked to probably 90% of the artists that I collect, rather than buying through a dealer or a broker or having a decorator purchase my art for me. That's part of the feeling behind the art, is to get to know the artist a little bit about their background, and a lot of them don't particularly have any meaning behind their art. You interpret it the way you want it to. But if somebody just goes and to an art show, and one of the things I think about our gallery, Gallery 10, some galleries can be maybe a little bit intimidating. You know, you feel like you have to know about the art or be able to talk about it, or it's very expensive. So a lot of galleries can be very intimidating. Gallery 10, and I think your gallery at Kortman's too, you can just go and be comfortable, meet the artist, and buy something. And I think too at the gallery we have pieces that range from, you know, $50 to $5,000, so you don't have to make a really huge investment. And I think a lot of people are of the misunderstanding that all original art is very expensive.
Or they also look at it as an investment. And
Yes.
it's an investment, I think, into your personality, or
Yes.
as an artifact that you want to keep for the rest of your life. At least
Indeed.
my feeling, and I'm sure you feel
I'm
the
not
same way.
investing in any of these pieces hoping that they'll go up in value someday so that I can trade them to someone else. They're my love, you know, and I enjoy looking at them, and I'll never trade them or give them away. But people do buy art for investment, you know, and they have people dealing with them, and they might buy it and trade it off for something else. That's okay too. I mean, there's all types of reason for buying art, but mine is strictly because I love it.
All right, you've been living here now 5 years. What could you say now as you look over the 5 years? How do you feel about the whole setup with living downtown, how everything has come together, and are you comfortable? Are you here to stay?
Oh, Doc, it's my favorite place in the world. And 10 years ago, if you'd said to me, you know, you're going to be living in downtown Rockford, I would have thought, I don't think so. I mean, not that I wouldn't have wanted to, but I just would never have thought of it. I didn't think of myself as a really urban person. But I love the whole concept of downtown, and it's really grown a lot since we've been down here. And I think we're kind of ambassadors for downtown, because I really open my home a lot for people to come up, see what you can do with an old building, with a wonderful space like this, with a little creativity. A lot of hard work, but if you do it yourself, you know, and there's a lot of people in the neighborhood that will help, give lots of advice, loan tools, and things like that. But there's just wonderful buildings down here, and it's a neighborhood, just like Shaw Woods, you know, is a neighborhood kind of thing. It's a neighborhood. There are people living down here 24 hours a day. We work down here, and it's wonderful to have good neighbors, people that care about the old historic buildings. And in fact, an interesting story, when Dewey was first a cadet on the police department, he was more kind of an errand boy at the time. They would send him down to Paisanos to get pie or something like that, or to the donut shop. And one of the men that lived up here at the time, I can't remember his name, Dave Myers maybe, or something like that, but they called him the Monkey Man because he had a pet monkey, and it used to sit and look in the window. And he had a bookstore up here, and Dewey was sent down here to get, you know, paperbacks or something. He used to buy Louis L'Amour westerns in paperbacks. And if somebody had said to him back then, "You're going to be living here someday," you know, and that's been 26 years ago. So it was just meant to be. This was just meant to be our home.
And this is home.
It is home. It is home sweet home.
Thank you.
The Art Zone now visits with artist Charles Gniech.
Well, we'd like to welcome Chuck Gniech, artist from Chicago, who's showing at the Kortman Gallery. Welcome to the Art Zone. Tell us a little bit about your work.
My work has basically always been abstract. Even when I was dealing with the figure, on a more realistic point of view, it was still abstract. I mean, if you think in terms of abstractions, everything is abstract. You know, reality is abstract. But when I was working with the figure as an abstraction, I mean, the last time I showed at the Kortman Gallery, the images were figurative, and how many people knew that? You know, other than people who walked up to me and said, "Could you tell me about your work? What's this all about?" Or if you read the titles, you know, the titles were more dealing with people's names, or one of them was called Diver. You know, so they were obviously figurative, but not so obvious. So yeah, the work now has kind of gone back. I mean, it's still that structural, that symbolic form, but it's kind of changing. It's much looser than it used to be.
Actually, I love this show. I'm originally from Chicago, and the feeling of how monumental his pieces are out there. I love the feeling of that. I like these smaller pieces. I was just talking with the artist, and he told me that he's got Conti crayon and ink and pastel, and the feeling in these smaller pieces is just wonderful. And again, the work is really solid, and I really like the show.
Everything is mixed media. They're combinations of acrylic, pastel, Conti crayon, pencil, ink. There's everything. It's a variety. It's a mixture. It deals with more surface, more. I'm playing basically. You know, I get to see what all these things do together and how they interact.
Do you have an architectural background, or?
Not at all. Basically, they deal with monuments, and in a sense, architecture they deal with monuments. You know, the architecture is monumental. Form, structure. You walk down the street and you see buildings and you see structure, you know, and you can kind of analyze that and look at what was done there. There is architecture involved in it. I mean, arches, you know, if you think of arches or stones or monuments, when you're walking down the street, if you walk down through the park, you know, I'm sure there's some sculptural monuments there. That's what the work is about. It's about those markers of time or of a situation or a place.
Scale. Tell me about scale. Well, how are you? Because I can sense that in your work.
One of the things that when I look at some of these paintings, I think of Klaus Oldenburg, and he was a pop artist, and some of the drawings that he did were like huge, giant clothespins and giant teddy bears, and he would do them as scale, and there'd be like little people here, and they'd be like, you know, 10 stories high. And I just find that incredible. And when I do my pieces, I kind of have that same attitude of, I'd love to see these as a piece of architecture, as sculpture, as, you know, usable sculpture.
It was very sculpture-like, I'd say. I think he had talked about that, about maybe doing kind of sculpture-type stuff, and it just really comes off really sculpture-like to me.
What's your affiliation with Charles Gniech?
I had a class with him at NIU.
I tend to be a little bit selfish as an artist. I do it because I like to do it. This is my time. This is my playtime. This is what I get to do. This is how I express myself. If somebody likes it, and God, that sounds so arrogant. If somebody likes what I'm doing, you know, great. I appreciate that. And if they want to purchase a piece, that's great. But on the other hand, if somebody says, "I want you to do this in mauve, and I want you to use these shapes," and
Self-size.
and yeah, self-size. No, thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate the support, but then it's not for me. It becomes work, and I don't think anybody should be working. I don't think that there should be work. I think you should always be doing something that you like to do, because then you don't have to work.
Well, I am a staff member, and I like the art usually. Like this art in particular is good. Working art openings isn't my preference. I think I would rather work at a regular evening, but
What do you think about working art openings?
Oh, it's great.
Why is that?
Because there's a lot of different people that come up here that don't normally come up here, and you get to see people that you don't always get to see.
What I see in it isn't necessarily what the viewer is going to see. You know, whenever you walk up to a piece of art, the viewer really is going to bring all of their experiences, all of their past to that piece, and they're going to get whatever they want, whatever their background brings to them, to that piece. So, you know, just because I do something and I see it one way doesn't necessarily mean that somebody else is going to. But that also means that, I mean, it's not necessarily important that they get what I intended, but necessarily it's more important that they get something from it, or go back to what their interests are and try to see something a little differently. Because chances are nobody's ever going to understand what it means to me. You know, and it's not important. It's not important that that happens. I don't know that I really care so much what people think of it as, you know, is this successful? As long as you get some sort of reaction, if you get people thinking, that's what's important for people to think.
I think it's very interesting. The textures and the colors are kind of unique. Some of the works are really texturized, and it's just very interesting.
I mean, we go through our lives looking at things or not looking at things. You know, this glass. You might have had this glass in your hand and hundreds and hundreds of times, but have you ever really stopped to look at it? Have you ever really thought about what it is? And people go through their lives totally removed from their surroundings. They take things for granted. So if you can just kind of take a moment and start looking at things for what they really are and seeing shadows, shapes, textures, take what's really there and pay attention to it, as opposed to running through your life and kind of missing it.
Is it important to you that your art last forever?
I suppose that that's a wonderful compliment if your work does continue, to move on, and hopefully it will give somebody else pleasure. But no, I guess I really never think about that while you're doing it. It's removing when I'm sitting down and creating a piece, it's like removing the rest of the world, and you just kind of focus on what's going on with you and what's happening, and what's happening with you doesn't necessarily remove the rest of the world from that, because the rest of the world is part of that. But other people, you don't really think about, okay, is this going to make this person happy? It goes back to the same question, or the same idea about commissions. Would you do a commission for somebody? Well, then you're doing it for somebody else as opposed to you, and there's this compromise there that it just doesn't work. Where somebody who goes and buys a piece that was already created, that I created, it's going to get that. I mean, they're going to wind up with so much more than you don't have to hold back. I'm not holding back. I get to do it the way I wanted to do it, and the way that I see the best way to do it. And then they can come. I mean, they get the benefit. They get to look at it. They get to try to understand it. Move on, as opposed to cutting it short and having me hold back. Putting the reins on.
Well, I had seen some of it before at his home, but when I saw it, it was really at a different phase. A lot of it seemed much more monochromatic, but I was really surprised at how colorful it is and how strong the images are.
If anything, if I had to talk about what this work was about, this body of work, it's about transitions.
Could you tell me a little bit about the creative process, though?
It isn't necessarily falling asleep at night and an image comes to mind. Sometimes it's walking down the street, like you were talking about the Halsted Street Monument. I have a tendency of sitting at this little cafe on Thursday afternoons reading, and there was this structure across the street from the cafe, and I started drawing it and abstracting it and playing with it. And I thought about everything that went into that building, that structure, the history behind it. and why it was still there. And so those images that I started creating, those little sketches, I always have my sketchbook with me. Those little sketches, you know, they keep changing, they keep growing, and eventually kind of look at it. And when I get to my studio and I decide I feel like I'm, you know, it's one of those times when I just got to paint, whether it be 4 o'clock in the morning or whatever. I'll start flipping through the sketchbook, and typically what happens is from the point that it's in the sketchbook to the point when you start playing with the canvas, totally changes. You know, you can still see some recognizable similarities, but for the most part, it just kind of grows. It evolves on its own. It just happens. And the layers and layers of different media that keep being, you know, that I keep applying to it tend to make it do just that. Some of the paintings that you're going to see in the show start out with a rocky surface. You know, there's all kinds of texture, and there's all kinds of other materials that are applied to the canvas as well as just paint or the typical things. One of them has dirt. I mean, there's just texture of dirt in it, and it was done by mixing the dirt into the gesso prior to actually painting on the surface. But it creates an interesting surface. There are a variety of different textures and surfaces that are very important, and in a sense, they're all very symbolic as well. So the work it kind of just grows. There's not a specific process. Okay, now it's done, or it just kind of happens. And then there have been times when I put a canvas in a corner for a while, and then I put it back on the easel, and all of a sudden I'm going at it again. You know, it just keeps evolving.
All right, but when you do finish, what is the feeling?
Contentment. It's done. Okay, I've lived that part. Now it's time to move on. It's a transition. It's a learning process, constantly learning.
And so what would be the ultimate?
I think I've had that.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And what is that? What is the ultimate?
It's just that feeling that when you're working, typically hours will go by and I won't be aware of it. It's almost as though I've removed myself from the actual process. So yeah, that whole experience is the ultimate.
Well, that's great. It's sort of like it can't get better than that.
Exactly. It can't.
That's good. That's good. Thank you. The Art Zone would like to thank Charles Gniech and Charlene Berg, and we hope you enjoyed watching. If you have any suggestions or comments, give us a call at 968-0123 or stop in at J.R. Kortman Center for Design, 107 North Main, downtown. This is the Art Zone. This is the Art Zone.
The Art Zone is funded by J.R. Kortman Center for Design, downtown Rockford.
This is the Art Zone.